I've always said, the Met is not free of racism or discrimination or bias. What I say is, we've come a very long way in the last 20 years, and even behind that, there's further to go.
So you accept that there are individual racists or cases of racism, but what you deny is institutional racism, the idea that there is structural racism in the force and in the way you police. And that is at odds with what every other organisation in the world, it seems, has done since George Floyd, which is to look at itself and say, yes, we've got problems. Why are you going in the other way? You seem to be in denial.
So we have zero tolerance of racist behaviour within the Met. Just last week, somebody was sacked for racist conduct. And everybody knows that that is the case. We embraced, if you like, the challenge that was set to us 20 years ago by Sir William Macpherson in the Stephen Lawrence inquiry, in which he came up with a definition of institutional racism. I was the person charged with implementing the recommendations, and I'm very proud of what we did. I think we've come a very, very, very long way. I'm not in denial. What I want to do is work with people on the things that still cause concern, the things that are of concern to, for example, some of my Black, Asian and minority ethnic staff, or some of our people in our communities.
But you could say we've got better, but we are still institutionally racist. And you're not saying that. You're saying you've got a problem with institutional racism. I mean, do you accept that there is still institutional racism?
I am perfectly content for other people to judge us however they like and to apply whatever labels are helpful for them. I don't find it a helpful label. I do think every day about whether my systems and processes that we have here might have bias in them, and how do we get rid of them?
Well, do they have bias in them?
They absolutely have had in the past.
Do they now?
And now, what we have now is signs of, for example, I'll give you an example, in terms of our misconduct processes. To my, horror, it is still the case that if you are a Black, Asian, minority ethnic person in the Met, you are twice as likely to find yourself in a misconduct process. What I can show you is that it's worse in education, worse in the National Health Service, and that I have reduced that disparity.
Is there racism in the police force beyond individual racism? Is there structural racism?
I don't think it is. I think it is a contested definition. I think it means all sorts of things to different people. I don't think it's helpful. I want to focus on getting the work done, and the work is improving the confidence of our Black, Asian, minority ethnic communities in their police service, and making sure that I have an inclusive, fair, diverse workforce. And I'm very proud of my current Metropolitan Police, but there is more to do.
Obviously, the most controversial issue at the moment is the extent of stops and the disproportionality and stops and searches. What do you think the effect on a young Black teenager is of being repeatedly stopped by the police, handcuffed and searched when you've done absolutely nothing wrong?
So I cannot put myself in the shoes of a young person in the scenario that you describe. We do stop and search to protect people. We do it to save lives. We do it because violent crime is our #1 priority. Our Black young men are hugely disproportionately stabbed and killed. Our Black young men, sadly, are hugely tangled up in the criminal justice system and involved in carrying knives. So we do stop and search in high violence areas. We do stop and search to take knives and weapons off the street. We've taken 4,500 off the street in the last year. We have made 34,000 arrests as a result of stop and search. And I can see that it is one thing, but just one thing, that is having a big impact on reducing violence in London.
So, Black parents have to have that talk with their children about what to do if you're stopped by the police. If you were the mother of a Black boy and you had no worries about his behaviour, what would you say to him?
No, I'm not the mother of a Black boy. It's very hard, of course, for me to put myself in that position. But I would say the police are here to protect you. I would say you should know your rights. There are things you should ask the officer, potentially. If you are concerned about it, of course, complain afterwards. But I would say speak to the officer, allow the search to go forward, be polite, and you will find polite, courteous, compassionate patient people talking to you.
In your answer about disproportionality, you talked about black people being victims of crime and also being involved in the criminal justice system. I mean, you are basically saying that black people are more likely to be criminals.
The vast majority of black people are not criminals and never will be criminals. Unfortunately, in our society at the moment, for very complex reasons, as you well know, and David Lammy's report shows, and many others, the current statistics show that, unfortunately, both in terms of victimisation and in terms of being in the criminal justice system as offenders, young black men are massively disproportionately.
So doesn't that explain some of the attitudes we've seen on camera? When we've looked at the British athletes and the way they were treated, or Dawn Butler, or any of the other cases. Channel 4 News has filmed lots of cases. That if there is an attitude amongst the police that black people are more likely to be criminals, that explains some of the aggression.
I have a great deal of faith in my officers. I spend an enormous amount of time with them. I'm not going to comment on individual cases, but some of the videos that you have seen or shown have been extremely partial, and there is very often, in fact, pretty much always,
why don't you release the rest of the video?
A different side to the story.
You don't show us
that. But what I would say is that the officers I observe on the street are not biased. They are not approaching something, assuming anything.
You announced this week that you were shelving the Stephen Lawrence investigation. That seems quite provocative timing, in amongst all of this controversy. Why announce this now? Why take that decision now? I mean, let me just quote to you retired Superintendent Leroy Logan, who said, the crazy decision to shelve, by Cressida Dick to shelve the case couldn't come at a worse time, with trust in police at its lowest for decades, especially during this time of the Black Lives Matter movement. She didn't have to do it. She doesn't care.
So I care deeply. I care deeply about London. I care deeply about our black communities. And I care deeply about the investigation into Stephen's death. I've been associated with that for 20 years. I was very much part of what brought the two killers that we brought to justice. I commissioned the forensic review that started that off. We had been then in an inactive phase. We have now gone into an inactive phase again. We will review every 2 years. And at that point, if there's been, again, forensic technology breakthroughs, it's likely we will start again. We will, of course, respond. I've got officers who know all about the case still. We'll respond to any new information. And I don't want to hold out false hopes, but it seems to me extremely likely, if you look forward, that at some stage we will not be in an inactive phase. But to pretend that we have viable lines of inquiry when we don't would be completely wrong and disingenuous. I don't accept confidence is at an all-time low. I think that's a ludicrous thing to say. Just 5 months ago, a survey showed that our black Londoners had more confidence in the job of the local police than white Londoners.
Let me just ask you briefly about the flip side of this, because while some communities feel that they are being overly pursued, there is also some suspicion amongst some circles about whether policing is really done without fear or favour when it comes to the establishment. We saw the way the Dominic Cummings inquiry was handled, and a lot of people were suspicious about that, about whether the police were worried about going into a political area. And we also look at what's happening with Prince Andrew and Ghislaine Maxwell right now, which is the focus of a police inquiry in America. And is there any fear of the establishment when it comes to policing?
No. I mean, you're looking at somebody who has investigated all sorts of politicised things, parliamentary expenses. I was in charge of that. Phone hacking had a massive political side to it. Of course it did. I and my team do act without fear or favour. But the truth is, it's in the nature of policing that whatever you do, it will sometimes be too much for some people and not enough for others.
Because just on Prince Andrew, the police did confirm that a complaint had been looked into, but then it wasn't taken any further. Does it worry you at all that this is still the focus of inquiries in the United States, but not here, where the matter is supposed to have taken place?
No, the locus and focus of any investigation in relation to Jeffrey Epstein, for example, is clearly in America. And if the Americans need our assistance at any stage, then we will give them that.
Commissioner, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.